If you've ever worked the night shift, you know how surreal it feels. The world seems different when most of it is fast asleep. For the past year, I've been hosting a late-night radio program in Portland. While I've enjoyed the freedom of having the airwaves all to myself, it can get pretty isolating. That said, I thought I had grown accustomed to that solitude, until one particular night proved otherwise. It was a chilly December evening, the kind where the rain clings to your coat, and the wind slices through you like a knife. I showed up at the station around 11 p.m., as usual, clutching my go-to caffeinated drink. The building was as lifeless as ever, the hum of the fluorescent lights louder than any conversation I'd had there in weeks. My show started at midnight. The routine was straightforward: play some tunes, chat a bit, and take the occasional call. It was typically uneventful. Everything started off like any other night. I queued up some indie rock tracks, made a few sarcastic remarks about the gloomy weather, and read a quirky news article about someone trying to steal a live reindeer from a Christmas market. Everything was going smoothly, until the first call came in. It was just past 12:30 a.m. when the phone rang. Calls weren't unheard of, but they were rare enough to make me perk up when the line lit up. "Good evening, you're on the air," I said, my voice laced with its usual dry humor. "Nothing. Just static." "Hello? Anyone there?" I tried again. The static crackled faintly before the line went dead. I rolled my eyes and moved on, assuming it was just someone dialing the wrong number. It happened more often than you'd think. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated. Something about the earlier call had unsettled me, but I shook it off and answered. "You're live on KPLX," I said, trying to sound upbeat. Once again, static. But this time, there was something else, a faint whisper too garbled to understand. "Hello? If you're trying to reach us, you might need to adjust your phone or speak up," I said, forcing a chuckle. The whispering grew louder for just a moment. It was still indecipherable, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The line clicked off again. I set the receiver down, muttering, "Weird," under my breath, and went back to my playlist. But every time I glanced at the phone, a creeping unease gnawed at me. The third call came in at 1:15 a.m. By then, the station was silent except for the music playing through the soundboard. "Okay, you've got my attention now. What's going on?" I said, picking up the phone. The static was softer this time, and then I heard it clear as day. A voice whispered my name, "Matt?" My grip on the receiver tightened. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. The whisper came again, slower this time. "Matt, you dropped your pen?" I froze. My eyes darted to the desk, and there it was, my pen lying on the floor where I had accidentally dropped it earlier. My mind raced. There was no way anyone could have known that. The studio was empty, and the windows were too high and covered with thick blinds. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever it was, they weren't guessing, they were watching me. For the next hour, I was a mess. I stumbled over my words on air, unable to focus. My eyes kept scanning the room, searching for cameras or any clue as to how the caller could have known what they did. At 2:10 a.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it, willing it to stop. It rang 4 times before I reluctantly picked it up. The static greeted me once more, softer now, almost like a breath. Then the voice spoke again. "Look outside." A chill ran down my spine. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but curiosity, or perhaps stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from the desk drawer and walked to the lobby. The front doors were made of glass, but the rain had fogged them up, making it hard to see outside. Slowly, I shone the flashlight toward the doors. At first, all I saw was my own distorted reflection. But then, a figure emerged from the shadows. They were wearing a dark hoodie, the face hidden in the hood's shadow. In their hand, they held a phone. They stood perfectly still, rain dripping from their jacket. And then, as if sensing my gaze, they raised the phone to their ear. The lobby phone rang. I bolted back to the studio, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My breathing was ragged, my thoughts scrambled. I grabbed my personal phone and left a frantic voicemail for the station manager, then called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the figure was gone. They searched the area and reviewed the security footage. What they found made my stomach turn. The cameras had captured the figure pacing outside the station for nearly an hour before stopping at the door. They had been on the phone the entire time. Around 1:15 a.m., the exact moment the caller mentioned my pen, the figure looked directly at the camera and smiled. I took the next week off, claiming I was sick. When I returned, I requested a shift change to the daytime hours. I haven't worked a graveyard shift since. Whoever that person was, they wanted me to know I wasn't as alone as I thought. And that's a feeling I'll carry with me every time I step into a studio. This summer, I've spent a lot of evenings over at my buddy Will's place. His dad owns a few acres of land way out in the sticks, about a 20-minute drive from my house, and I already live on the edge of nowhere. Will's dad works as a veterinarian during the day and runs an animal clinic on part of the property. But at home, he has a small farm with various animals, including chickens, pigs, and sheep. Their driveway is long, probably around 300 feet, winding through trees, barns, and animal enclosures before reaching the house. In the daytime, it's nothing special, but since I usually get there after sunset, it's pitch dark, and I have to rely on my car's headlights or my phone flashlight to navigate. Otherwise, I aim for the faint glow of the house lights or pray for a bright moon. The house itself is packed with cool things and is an amazing spot to hang out. There's a pool, a massive TV, a grand piano, loud Bluetooth speakers, and plenty of animals to cuddle, like dogs and cat. It's a paradise for relaxing or throwing a party. The hosts are always welcoming and happy to offer drinks to guests. Once Will's dad and whoever he's seeing at the time retire to their room for the night, the house is basically ours. Most of the time, it's just Will and me, but he often invites other friends to join. One evening, we brought along a newer friend named Sam. We met him at a local hangout spot, and while he seemed a little green, he was a nice guy. When Sam arrived, we let the dogs out to stretch and burn off some energy. I noticed there wasn't another car in the driveway and asked Sam where he'd park. He explained that his mom had dropped him off and he planned to get an Uber home. Will and I were taken aback. It's pretty much an unspoken rule that you need your own ride to come out here since getting an Uber this far into the countryside is nearly impossible. We apologized for not mentioning it beforehand, but Sam assured us it wouldn't be a problem. We also told him he could crash in the loft if he couldn't find a ride later. The night went smoothly, though I ended up drinking more than usual. After swimming and gaming, we were all sitting on the back porch listening to music. I started feeling dizzy and excused myself to lie down on the couch for a bit. I wasn't sick, but I needed to close my eyes for a moment. About 10 minutes later, Sam came inside to tell me he was leaving. Somehow, he'd managed to get an Uber, and the car would be at the gate in a few minutes. Sam asked if I could walk him down the unlit driveway since he wasn't familiar with it. Without thinking, I agreed and got up to help him. In hindsight, I wasn't remotely prepared for that short walk. I had no shirt, no flashlight, no phone, just my swim trunks and a pair of cheap slides. Sam used his phone's flashlight to guide us as we made our way to the gate. Just as we reached the last curve, the Uber's headlights came into view. I said goodbye, and Sam walked through the gate to his ride. I turned around to head back to the house. That's when it hit me. The darkness was overwhelming. Beyond the curve in the driveway, I couldn't see a thing. I reached for my phone only to realize I'd left it behind. I briefly thought about running back to Sam to borrow his light, but I didn't want to delay him. Instead, I decided to stick to the pavement and hoped I'd eventually see the house lights. But there was nothing. The trees and bushes were too thick, blocking any light from the house. It was a cloudy night with no moon, and there wasn't even light pollution to help. It was the kind of darkness where you might as well have your eyes closed. A sense of unease began to creep in, but I pushed it down and kept walking. Within seconds, I veered off the pavement into the dirt and had to backtrack. It happened again moments later. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust, but it was useless. I couldn't even see my own hand in front of me. I tried listening for music from the porch, but all I heard were crickets. Even the animals were silent, likely asleep. Suddenly, I realized I'd wandered off the driveway entirely. The flimsy slides I was wearing made it impossible to feel the ground properly. I stopped and tried to focus on the faint specks of light I could see in the distance. But which one was the house? And which ones belonged to neighbors far away? I picked one and headed toward it, only to walk straight into a tree. I recoiled, realizing I needed to keep my hands out in front of me to avoid smacking into anything else. I turned and tried a new direction. A few steps later, I felt it, a giant spiderweb, the thick kind that clings to you like a net. My arms were tangled in it, and I immediately started flailing, slapping at myself to get it off, terrified that a spider might be on me. After what felt like forever, I calmed down enough to realize I was completely disoriented. Panic set in. I thought about sitting down and waiting for help, but who would come? Sam had left, and Will and the others probably assumed I was sleeping in the loft. Screaming for help seemed pointless in such a remote area, and if I wandered onto someone else's property, they might mistake me for an intruder. I forced myself to take a deep breath and think rationally. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing to calm down. When I opened them, I noticed a faint contrast between the cloudy sky and the silhouette of trees. Slowly turning in a circle, I spotted a distinct shape, the roofline of a barn. I headed toward it cautiously, hands outstretched and steps slow. Finally, I saw it, the faint outline of the driveway. Relief washed over me as I stepped onto the pavement. I followed it toward the distant lights, still stumbling occasionally but eventually making it back to the house. Walking through that door felt like stepping into heaven. I went out to the porch to share my ordeal, laughing about it to lighten the mood. But in truth, those terrifying minutes taught me an important lesson: never venture into the countryside unprepared. I decided to take a late-night stroll through the park when I couldn't get any sleep. Life had been overwhelming lately. My mom was unwell, I had just lost my job, and on top of that, my 3-year relationship had recently ended. I felt suffocated in my apartment, and scrolling endlessly on my phone no longer distracted me from my problems. The park, just a block away from my apartment, had a small pond and a flock of ducks that I used to enjoy watching. Hoping for some peaceful company, I grabbed a partially used bag of frozen peas from my freezer. Maybe feeding the ducks could bring me a moment of peace. The streets were deserted as I stepped outside. It was a little past midnight on a Tuesday, and the neighborhood was eerily quiet, apart from the occasional passing car. Normally, I'd be among those sound asleep at this hour, but ever since losing my job, my sleep schedule had gone off the rails. The stillness of the street felt both strange and oddly comforting, and I didn't feel the need for my usual music to drown out the noise. When I reached the park, it was completely empty, even quieter and darker than the street. The dim streetlights, spaced far apart, cast weak pools of light, leaving long stretches in shadow. I moved silently, not wanting to disturb anyone who might be resting on a bench. As I approached the pond, I noticed the ducks huddled together, nestled in a patch of cattails surrounded by algae. I sat down on the grassy slope of the shore, hoping they'd waddle over to me if I waited long enough. But they barely stirred, and I didn't have the heart to disturb their sleep by tossing peas at them. I set the bag aside, feeling slightly disappointed. I had imagined the ducks quacking happily, pecking at the frozen peas, and maybe even pestering me for more. Instead, I found myself alone in the darkness, with only the soft sounds of the night. Or so I thought. A quiet voice startled me out of my thoughts. "Excuse me," it said, softly yet clearly. I turned to see a man standing nearby. He looked homeless, and I noticed a bench behind me that I hadn't realized was occupied. His belongings were piled beside it, making it clear he had been sleeping there. "Sorry to bother you," he continued. "Could I have that bag of peas?" It took me a second to process his words. Then I realized I'd probably woken him up with the crinkling of the bag. Feeling a little embarrassed, I quickly handed it over. "Of course," I said. "I brought it for the ducks, but they're asleep. Here, take it." The man gave a small laugh as he accepted the bag. "You snooze, you lose," he joked, before heading back to his bench. It wasn't much, just a handful of frozen peas, but I hoped it was better than nothing. He didn't ask for anything else and quietly ate his snack, while I stared out at the pond, listening to the faint crinkling of the bag. After a while, the park's quiet began to lull me into a calm state. I could hear the gentle rustling of the trees as the wind passed through them and watched the ripples on the water's surface. For a brief moment, the chaos of my life felt distant. Then, without warning, a cold sensation pressed against the back of my neck, a gun barrel. "Don't move," a voice commanded. "Take out your phone and wallet and hand them over." Heart racing, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, passing it over my shoulder. "Where's your wallet?" the mugger hissed. "I didn't bring it," I stammered. "I swear, I don't have it." "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "Hand it over, or I'll make this real simple for both of us." I froze, trying to think of what to do. My mind was a blur of fear and panic. Before I could say anything, another voice rang out. "Hey!" The mugger flinched, turning toward the sound. Before he could react further, there was a sickening thud, and he collapsed to the ground. I turned to see the homeless man from earlier standing over him, holding a sharp rock in his hand. "Thank you," I managed to say, still shaken. "Grab your stuff and get out of here," he said firmly. "You better be gone before this guy wakes up." I didn't need to be told twice. I scooped up my phone and quickly made my way out of the park. Glancing back, I saw the man gathering his belongings and walking off in a different direction. The mugger began to stir, but I didn't stick around to see what happened next. When I got home, I locked the door and leaned against it, finally letting out the breath I'd been holding. I couldn't sleep that night, but I felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the man who had saved me. He didn't owe me anything, yet he put himself at risk to help me. I only wished I could have repaid him for his kindness, but somehow I knew that wasn't why he'd done it. I recently went clubbing for the first time with a group of friends during a girls' night out. They gave me a hard time because I wasn't interested in drinking on my first night out at a large downtown nightclub. I wanted to stay clear-headed until I felt comfortable and had a better sense of what to expect. My friends, however, kept trying to pressure me into drinking, making me feel like I wasn't being fun. I wasn't even sure if clubbing was something I'd enjoy in the first place. It was their idea to go, and I wasn't very familiar with alcohol. If drinking was the only way to have fun at a club, I doubted I'd enjoy it at all. After some back and forth, they finally dropped it, and we all piled into an Uber from the apartment where we had met up. As soon as we got dropped off downtown, I started second-guessing everything. The area was overwhelming. Music was blaring from every bar and some cars. People were stumbling on the sidewalks, shouting, and even fighting. The air reeked of smoke, vomit, and urine. The sensory overload almost made me consider drinking just to dull everything around me. My friends were already tipsy before we even arrived. While we waited in line to get into the club, I found myself talking to the men around us, mostly because my friends encouraged it. The wait was about 20 minutes, but during that time I couldn't stop worrying about my outfit, how revealing it was, who I was with, and whether this was a good idea at all. Anytime a man tried to talk to me, I brushed him off, which, of course, led my friends to criticize me again. By this point, I was regretting becoming friends with them. I wasn't even that close to them, to begin with. I'd started hanging out with them because I had shared a class with one of them and had convinced myself I needed to party more as college was ending. These girls seemed like the right group for that, but I realized it just wasn't my thing. As I was having this epiphany and debating whether to leave, we finally reached the front of the line. Before I knew it, I was walking into the club. I thought it would be better inside, but it was the complete opposite. The smell of artificial fog was suffocating, the music was painfully loud, and the space was packed with a sea of people. My friends led the way to the bar, and they quickly ordered some overpriced drink. I wanted to ask for water, but the bartender seemed to instinctively know I wasn't planning to order alcohol and ignored me. Before I could even react, my friends had their drinks and vanished into the crowd. I tried again to get the bartender's attention but had no luck. When I turned back, my friends were gone. I was angry, on the verge of tears, and just wanted to leave. I pulled out my phone to call an Uber, but before I could, a guy tapped me on the shoulder. "Bartender ignoring you, huh? Let me get you a drink," he shouted over the music, leaning in close. "No, thanks," I yelled back. "I was only getting water, and I'm about to leave." He frowned and looked disappointed. "You just got here, though," he said. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, but he pressed on. "Did your friends ditch you?" Even though I tried to hide it, my face must have given it away. Anxiety and paranoia hit me all at once. My friends had abandoned me, and now this stranger knew I was alone. Worst case scenario, I thought. The one thing in my favor was that I hadn't been drinking, so at least I was sober enough to think clearly. Still, my emotions were all over the place. The only solution I could see was to leave immediately. Without saying another word to the guy or bothering to let my friends know, I stood up and headed straight for the exit. The man shouted after me, and when I glanced back, I realized he was following me. Panic set in. Had I made the wrong decision? Maybe, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I made it outside and pulled out my phone to request an Uber, setting the pickup point 2 blocks away to put some distance between myself and the crowd. As I waited, I heard the guy shouting behind me. My Uber was still 4 minutes away, but I knew he'd catch up to me before then. When I looked back, I saw him running toward me. My stomach dropped. There was no reason for him to be chasing me. When he got close, I stepped into the street, forcing a car to slam on its brakes and honk. The man reached out to grab me, and without thinking, I spun around and screamed at him, "Leave me alone! I don't know you!" My voice cut through all the noise, silencing the entire block. Everyone stopped and stared. The man backed off, raising his hands defensively, and I seized the opportunity to walk away as quickly as I could. 2 blocks later, I reached the pickup spot. There were a few people around, which was somewhat reassuring, but I was still on edge. My Uber was now 2 minutes away, but that was still enough time for the creep to catch up. I anxiously scanned my surroundings. Across the street, a man on his phone kept glancing at me. Another man appeared at the end of the block, also on his phone, slowly walking toward me. Finally, my Uber arrived. Just as the car pulled up, I saw the creep from the club coming around the corner. At that moment, I noticed another car pulling up from the opposite direction. My heart pounded as I realized I was alone on the block with these 3 men and 2 cars. Which car was my ride? Which one was trouble? Thankfully, the Uber had a light in the window, and the driver looked like the right person. Without hesitation, I ran to the car and got in, shouting at the driver to lock the doors. He did so just in time, as one of the men tried the handle. The driver didn't need an explanation. He sped off immediately. I thanked him profusely as he drove me back to my friend's apartment. Or rather, my former friend's apartment. When I told them what had happened, they blamed me for leaving, even though they were the ones who had abandoned me. Moral of the story: choose your friends wisely. If these spine-chilling horrors gave you the creeps tonight, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales. What would you have done in this situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Share this video with a friend who claims they're fearless at night and see if they still feel that way. Remember, the darkness isn't always empty, and being alone doesn't always mean you're safe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.